I reenacted my husband's most humiliating childhood memory at dinner because I wanted a table of near strangers to laugh. Evan had trusted me with the story of adults forcing him to repeat words through a stutter, and he made me promise I would keep it private. I broke that promise on purpose and even copied the sound they used to shame him. When he calmly cleared his place and left, he was deciding how much of himself he could still leave with me. We had moved 9 months earlier for my job, and making friends had been harder for me than I admitted. Evan settled in naturally. He remembered names, volunteered at neighborhood workdays, and could spend 10 minutes talking to somebody without trying to impress them. I was always monitoring the room. I wanted to be the quick, interesting woman people invited back. 4 years before that dinner, Evan had told me why he hated being praised for speaking well. When he was a child, certain adults in his family treated his stutter like stubbornness. At large meals, they made him stand at the end of the table and repeat a request from the beginning whenever a word caught. One uncle tapped a butter knife against his glass to signal a restart. The cousins could not eat dessert until Evan finished. He told me that in bed with the lights off, before he went to sleep, he said, very plainly, "Please don't ever make that a story." Not even with friends. I promised I would not. The dinner was at Nina and Aaron's house. There were only 6 of us, all still new enough to one another that every pause felt important to me. Aaron mentioned hearing Evan speak at a neighborhood meeting and said he made public speaking look easy. I saw an opening for a laugh. I said Evan had survived the world's cruelest dinner table speech academy. Then I described the forced requests, the waiting cousins, and the uncle with the butter knife. I tapped my own knife lightly against my water glass and joked that Evan could probably order pie during a fire alarm now. I remembered his request while I was speaking. I knew the story was private. I also saw Nina begin to smile, and I chose to smile. There were 2 short laughs. Then everyone looked at Evan. He did not argue with me. He did not explain what I had left out or tell the table that I was lying. He folded his napkin into a square, placed it on his plate, and stood. He carried his plate, fork, and water glass to the kitchen. Then he took his coat from the back of his chair and left the house without a speech. The front door clicked shut. For several seconds, none of us said anything. I filled the silence because filling silence was how I had created the problem in the first place. He hates being the center of attention, I said. He'll walk it off. Nina looked toward the front hall. Aaron lowered his eyes to his plate. I tried another smile and said couples collected embarrassing stories about each other. That was intimacy. That was marriage. I acted as if Evan's departure proved he was unusually sensitive instead of proving I had crossed a line. Nina offered to wrap dessert for us. I said no. I stayed at the table for another 11 minutes because leaving immediately would have meant admitting that Evan's response was justified. When I finally walked home, I had turned my shame into irritation. Evan was in the den. His dress shirt was draped over a chair, and he was pulling a blanket from the cabinet where we kept linens for guests. I started with, "You could have told me you were upset." He stopped unfolding the blanket and looked at me. "I asked you never to tell that story." "I know, but they weren't laughing at you. You tapped the glass." That detail stripped away the version I was trying to build. I had not mentioned his childhood in some tender tribute to how far he had come. I had reenacted the part that humiliated him because it made the anecdote sharper. I said I was trying to help our new friends know him better. "They're your friends," he said. "And now they know something I did not choose to tell them." I told him married people shared history. I actually used those words, as though marrying him had transferred ownership of every frightened thing he had ever whispered to me. Evan asked, "Then what can I tell you that doesn't become ours to perform?" I had no answer, so I criticized his tone. He nodded once, spread the blanket across the bed, and said he was sleeping there. The next morning, I expected the familiar peace offering of coffee. Evan normally woke first and left a mug beside my laptop. covered with a saucer so it stayed warm. Instead, the coffee maker was rinsed and empty. He had made one travel mug for himself and gone out before I came downstairs. I called that petting in my head. It took me days to understand that he had not denied me coffee. He had stopped performing the small husbandly role I assumed would continue even while I dismissed his hurt. His routines changed without becoming dramatic. He still paid his share of the bills. He still took out the trash when the bin was full. But he washed his clothes separately, bought only the groceries he planned to eat, and stopped wandering into the kitchen while I cooked. Before that dinner, he used to tell me about his day in pieces. A strange question from a client. A mistake he had caught before a meeting. A worry about whether a younger coworker was being overlooked. After the dinner, I got one word, fine. When his brother called, Evan took the phone into the den and shut the door. When a friend from his old job asked for advice, he went for a walk before answering. He was not keeping secrets to punish me. He was choosing rooms where I could not collect material. 3 days after the dinner, I gave him what I thought was a complete apology. I said I was sorry the joke landed badly and sorry he felt exposed. He listened and said, "You're apologizing for the result. You still haven't said you had no right to tell it." I told him he was demanding perfect wording. "No," he said. "I'm listening for whether you understand what you did." The following month, Nina and Aaron were supposed to come to our place for dinner. Evan told me to cancel his part of it. I said backing out would make everything more awkward. "It is already awkward," he said. "I am not sitting at our table so you can show everyone we're fine." I accused him of punishing 4 people over one joke. He said he was making one decision for himself. Then he went upstairs. That sentence stayed with me because I had treated his refusal as an attack. I was still describing every boundary he set as something he was doing to me. Nina came by the next afternoon to return a serving dish I had left at her house. I met her on the front step and tried to recruit her into my version. "I think Evan heard cruelty that nobody intended," I said. Nina held the dish against her coat. I shouldn't have laughed. I told her it had only been a nervous laugh. "It was," she said. "But you saw his face and kept going." That was the first time anyone had said it without protecting me. Nina had seen the moment I made my choice. She had seen me notice Evan's expression, glance at the smiling people around us, and keep talking. I wanted her to say all couples made mistakes. Instead, she handed me the dish and said she hoped I would give him room. A week later, Evan and I attended a neighborhood cleanup we had committed to before the dinner. We arrived separately. I was stacking bags near the curb when Aaron approached Evan beside a row of garden tools. Aaron said he was sorry about what Evan's relatives had done to him and added that nobody in the group thought less of him. He meant it kindly. That almost made it worse. Evan thanked him, picked up a rake, and walked to the far end of the block. I watched another person treat my husband's private memory as something available for discussion. Aaron was not responsible for that. I was. Until then, I had imagined the story staying inside Nina's dining room, as if privacy could be broken in a controlled area. But every guest now carried a fact about Evan that he had lived most of his adult life without offering them. Even if none of them repeated it, he could no longer enter that circle without wondering what they remembered when he spoke. That night, I sat alone at our dining table and began remembering other conversations. At a barbecue the previous summer, I had told people Evan rehearsed for a job interview in our laundry room because the dryer noise calmed him. Everyone had found it charming. I had liked being the wife who knew the private ritual behind his success. At my sister's birthday, I had described how he cried in a grocery store parking lot after his grandfather died because he could not make himself walk into our empty apartment. I used it to prove he was softer than he looked. He had gone quiet on the drive home, and I told him my family loved him more after hearing it. Once, when friends complimented the shelves he built in our office, I joked that he measured everything 4 times because his father used to call him careless. Evan later asked why I had brought his father into it. I said I had been bragging about his craftsmanship. Each time I had attached a flattering purpose to the disclosure. I was showing his strength. I was celebrating his sensitivity. I was explaining his attention to detail. The purpose always made me sound generous and left him sounding unreasonable if he objected. Evan had asked me to stop before. Not with a grand confrontation, but in sentences I had trained myself not to hear. That wasn't really mine to share. Could you leave that part out next time? I had told you that because it was just us, I would kiss his cheek and accuse him of being private. Sometimes I promised to be more careful. In another room went quiet, and I reached for the most valuable thing I had. Access to a man who trusted me when nobody else was listening. I had treated his confidence as proof of my importance. If I could reveal the hidden explanation behind Evan's habits, people would know I was not just his wife. I was a person with backstage access. I could make people laugh, make them lean closer, or make an ordinary success sound more moving. The stutter story was different only because Evan had placed a clear fence around it. I had not misunderstood. I had climbed over it. When I finally apologized again, I did it in the den doorway. Evan was reading, and I did not sit beside him or ask him to put the book down. I knew you told me not to share it, I said. I remembered while I was talking. I used it because I wanted them to think I was funny and close to you. Then I blamed you for leaving. I had no right to tell it. Evan closed the book, but kept one finger between the pages. I believe you, he said. For one hopeful second, I mistook that for forgiveness. Then he added, that is why this is harder. You didn't forget. He told me he had arranged to rent a furnished studio for 2 months. It was 10 minutes from his office, and available the following Saturday. My first impulse was to argue about the expense. My second was to ask whether he planned to come back when the 2 months ended. I managed not to do either. He said, I don't know how to relax here. Every time I start telling you something, I wonder where I'll hear it again. I promised I would never do it again. You promised that about this exact story, he said. There was nothing cruel in his voice. That made it impossible to dismiss him as angry. He was not moving out to frighten me into behaving better. He was moving because my promise no longer gave him a reason to feel safe. On Saturday, Evan packed clothes, work files, 2 pans he had owned before we married, and the old blue quilt from the den. He did not empty the house or divide our wedding gifts. He made 3 trips to his car and left his key on his regular key ring. Before he went, I asked what he wanted me to tell our families. The truth, he said, without telling them mine. That was the first responsibility he gave me after the dinner, and it showed how easily I could fail again. I could not explain the separation by repeating the stutter story and casting myself as a woman who had learned a painful lesson. His private memory did not become public property just because exposing it had changed my life. When my sister called, I said, I broke a confidence Evan explicitly asked me to keep. I did it in front of other people, and then I minimized it. He moved out because he doesn't trust me with personal parts of his life. She asked what the confidence was. I said it was not mine to repeat. She pressed once, then stopped. The silence that followed felt unbearable. I let it stay. I also called each person who had been at the dinner. I did not ask them to reassure Evan or tell him I was suffering. I said the story had been private. I had known that when I shared it, and they should not repeat it or bring it up with him again. Aaron apologized for approaching Evan at the cleanup. I told him he had been trying to be kind, but yes, leaving the subject alone was best. Nina said thank you for saying it plainly. She did not invite me to the next dinner. I told Evan about the calls when he came by for mail. He stood in the entryway with his coat still zipped. That was the right thing to do, he said. I waited, although I had promised myself I would not wait for a reward. "It doesn't make me ready to come home," he added. I know. That was the first answer I gave him that did not contain a defense, a bargain, or a demand that he recognized my effort. The original 2-month rental has ended. Evan extended it for 3 more. We meet on Sunday afternoons at a bakery halfway between the apartment and the house. We discuss bills, mail, and the practical parts of being married while living apart. He has not said the marriage is over. He has also not promised that it will continue. Sometimes I ask how work is, and he says it is fine. I no longer push for details. The distance between that single word and the stories he once brought home is part of what I lost. The new social circle continued without us. Nina still waves when we see each other. Erin invited Evan to help with another neighborhood project, and Evan went. I was not included. Nobody announced a punishment. People simply stopped treating us as a pair because, for now, we are not living as one. Last Sunday, Evan came to collect the winter coat he had left in the hall closet. I told him I was sorry again, but I did not turn the apology into a report about how much I had changed. He nodded and said he knew. Then he carried the coat to his car. That evening, I heated soup and reached automatically for 2 bowls. I put one back in the cabinet and ate at the kitchen counter. The dining table stayed empty. There was nothing wrong with the silence. The damage had come from what I had once been willing to do to avoid it.